Hello, my friends. Before we get into this episode, I want to forewarn you, we get into politics. I've been trying to avoid it for this past year, but it's inevitable that it would happen. However, the politics all have to do with education, school choice, our kids, and homeschooling. So I felt like this author would be a fantastic guest to talk about his new book. So with that, let's get into the interview with Corey DeAngelis. My friends, and welcome back. And my friends, today is the first episode of season 2 of the School to Homeschool podcast. And there is nobody that I would want on here more than a public. I'll just read his bio because I'm so excited and I'm tongue-tied because I'm so excited to have him on here. This is Dr. Corey DeAngelis. Now, if you've ever watched Fox News, I guarantee you've seen him talk about the education system. Corey is a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children and a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He's been labeled the school choice evangelist and called the most effective school choice advocate since Milton Friedman. He's a regular on Fox News and frequently appears in the Wall Street Journal. He is also the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute, a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation, and an adjunct scholar at Cato Institute, and a board member at Liberty Justice Center. He holds a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas, and he's most recently the author of the book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. And so I've been reading this book. I mentioned it in the last few podcasts. So I'm very excited to have Dr. DeAngelis on. So thank you for coming on.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I got to correct you real quick. You called me doctor, but the truth is I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. Got a PhD in education policy, but no medical. I can't help you with those things.
I love it. So let's talk about this. How did you get involved in education now? And you're about to become a dad for the first time with your first baby just coming up here, which congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Baby Angelina's on the way, and I'm joining the parent revolution on the front lines as a foot soldier. So I'm excited about to. Everybody thought I was supercharged when it comes to education freedom. It's going to be even more so.
I love it. Well, that happens when you have kids. You suddenly go, oh my gosh, this stuff actually matters. Like it matters in a big way. So let's talk about your journey into education and how you became passionate about it, especially when you don't have kids yet. Yeah.
Right. I do. I have an unborn child. I am a father already. But yeah, I got into this as a researcher. I did my PhD in education policy at the University of Arkansas, where my first study looked at the effects of the Milwaukee private school choice program. It started in 1990. And my co-author and I found that over time, by the time the students were about 25 to 30 years of age, getting a choice in your child's education, all else equal, led to significant reductions in crime. So this was kind of a new outcome to be looked at. Most people look at short-term things like standardized test scores. We looked at something long-term. And since then, there's been 6 peer-reviewed studies all finding a correlation between more academic education freedom when it comes to school choice and then a reduction in crime later on in life. I also went to government schools all through K through 12. I went to government schools in San Antonio, Texas. And in high school, I actually went to something called a magnet school. So I had a form of school choice. It's still run by the government technically, but you're not assigned to it. In most places in America, you live at your address and you're assigned to a school based on where you live. It makes no sense. We don't structure society for any other industry this way. I mean, just imagine if you were assigned to your nearest grocery store or restaurant and they were giving you rotten food each week, or the food was expired, you were getting food poisoning and throwing up, or maybe the shelves were empty like we see in a lot of socialist countries and we have over time. And you had to move houses to get access to a better grocery store or restaurant. I mean, that would make zero sense, but that's how we structure the school system today. And that leads to horrible outcomes for a lot of kids and segregated schools as well. And so when I went to high school and went to this school that you're not assigned to, they don't have as much monopoly power. They actually have to attract their customers. They did a better job. And I was on the same campus physically as my residentially assigned government school. I saw the night and day difference for 4 years right before my eyes. And so I had a form of school choice. I think other families should have school choice too. And it shouldn't be limited to institutions run by the government. You should be able to take your kids' education dollars to another government-run school if you want, but you should also be able to go to a charter school, a private school, a religious school, or even just homeschooling. You should have the money follow the child, and some states do allow this, including Arizona, where you can use the funding on homeschool curriculum or homeschool co-ops or micro schools and so on and so forth. And I also got into this as an economist. I did my bachelor's and master's in economics, and nowhere is the problem of a socialist control of an institution or monopoly power more pronounced than in the government school system. I mean, again, we don't structure anything else like this.
No, we don't. So you get your degrees in this, and then what happened next?
Yeah, actually, I thought about going into academia. I figured out that was going to be an uphill battle going against the grain with the Marxists controlling the higher education system, especially when it comes to education academia. 99% I don't have an exact statistic for you, but like most of the people in education academia are not on board with school choice. They are total lefties. And they train the K through 12 educators that go out into society. But they also are the peer reviews in the academic process where I tried to submit this study, for example, on school choice reducing crime. It's a pretty simple study. We had student level data, long-term outcomes. We were able to control for things like race, gender, income, all the usual, whether you live in a single parent household or not. And one of my first reviews on that study, the reviewers said that it was fine, that they thought it was a causal relationship. But one of the reviewers said, well, you didn't talk about how this relates to whiteness, structural oppression, and power. I mean, things that had nothing to, that wasn't the point of the study. And they also were upset that my co-author and I referred to students in Milwaukee as urban students. And I was like, okay, fine. Like I could change it to students who live in urban areas or whatever. But they're about the journal referred to students as urban students. I mean, just total hypocrisy. They were trying to find a way to reject it. Anyway, it ultimately got published in a journal called Social Science Quarterly later on. And I've since peer reviewed. I had about 30 to 40 peer reviewed journal articles now. And I figured out that maybe why be in an institution where I'm just going against the grain the whole time? Why not be rewarded for my ideas instead of being punished? So I ended up going to think tanks. My first think tank was Cato Institute in DC, Reason Foundation, and now I'm at the American Federation for Children, a school choice advocacy group. And we have C3, C4, we PAC, we engage in elections and so on and so forth. And now we're winning so much, I'm almost getting tired of winning. Not really. We're not done yet, but we've had more advancement on the issue of school choice in the past 3 years than in the preceding 3 decades. And it's the union's own fault. Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, and her union lackeys, they fought to keep the government schools closed as long as possible because they wanted to hold children's education hostage to secure multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from taxpayers. It ended up working for them in the short run. They got $190 billion in so-called COVID relief since March. That's more than the U.S. dedicated to rebuild Europe in the Marshall Plan after World War II in real terms. That is a ton of money, but it just goes to show you the messed up incentives baked into the school system. They knew not just that they can get the same amount of benefits and pay and job security with the schools closed. They knew it was actually worse than that. They knew that they could actually use those closures. They could leverage the closures, hold the children's education hostage to say, we're closed because we need even more money. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, throwing more money at the problem, expecting different results. And this is what they do with every failure. If the test scores are low, well, we need more money. And since 1970, we've increased funding per student in the government schools by 170% after adjusting for inflation. Have the outcomes gotten 170% better? No, they obviously haven't. Maybe they've gotten better at indoctrinating kids with far left socialist ideology, but the educational outcomes haven't gotten better in math, reading, or writing. But uh, the reason that we've had so many victories when it comes to school choice is because the schools were closed for so long in the government sector. Families started to say, I need to figure something out. So they started homeschooling. Homeschooling has at least doubled since pre-pandemic levels. Private school enrollment's up, charter school enrollment's up. Families started voting with their feet, but they also started pushing back at school board meetings, and we saw how that worked out. I mean, the teachers unions have always told us we're accountable. We're democratically accountable. You can show up and you can talk to us and we'll listen to you. If you don't agree with us, fine, just tell us what you think and we'll change. They didn't change. They tried to bully and silence parents into submission. They didn't see parents as partners. They didn't see parents as customers. They saw them as a nuisance and tried to label them as evil people. They even had the National School Boards Association send a letter to the Biden administration implying that under the Patriot Act of all things, parents should be investigated for quote unquote domestic terrorism. Yes, the FBI even created a threat tag specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings. They wanted to use the heavy hand of the federal government to tell parents to sit down and shut up if you don't agree with us. And earlier drafts of that letter from the NSBA, the School Boards Association, even called for the military to be deployed and the National Guard to show up at school board meetings to try to silence parents. But their plan backfired. Parents started to be emboldened even more. They locked arms. They become a new interest group, more powerful than the unions. We can beat them at their own game if we band together, fight back. Since then, 26 states have left the School Boards Association, so that's a win. But also, families got to see what the heck was happening in the classroom through Zoom school, remote learning. We really should have just called it remotely learning. The government form of Zoom school was not a lot of learning going on.
No.
And families saw, more importantly, that the school's curriculum wasn't aligned with their values. And Vodi Bakum said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans.
I love that. Well, and that's when we started homeschooling, was July of 2020. And granted, in our school district tends to lean more conservative. However, I know what's going on in a lot of the classrooms. Thankfully, with my kids, when I was watching the Zoom school, I'm like, okay, they've got all the conservative teachers. So, but,
Yes.
and I hear people saying, oh, I tried homeschooling during COVID with my kids on Zoom. I'm like, that's not homeschooling.
It's not the same thing.
That's Zoom. It is Zoom schooling, right?
It's government school at home, and
right. And it doesn't.
Of course, it's going to be a failure. Exactly,
right.
And it's involuntary too.
Right. And these and I would watch my kids, poor teachers trying to take care of their kids, going just a minute, just and anyway, and that's the point that we started homeschooling. The fascinating thing is I try to stay on top of things with our school district, with our school board. And that was the point at which one of our current school board members, who was just elected a few months ago, went and spoke against another school board because of CRT. And he's like, look, this is garbage. I am Black. My kids are not, this is what's being taught. I'm not okay with it. And now he's been elected to our school district and being viciously attacked for bringing up what has been found on our shelves in our libraries, pushing a very, very hardcore left agenda and in gender ideology.
Yeah, look, the problem is the radical left has figured out that they don't even have to have their own kids anymore. They can just use the government school system that they've infiltrated for far too long, for decades, and they can control the minds of other people's children. They can change the direction of this country without even having their own children. 50 or so million kids go through the government school system each year for 13 years of their lives, for 7 hours a day. You can't beat the leftward drift just by having more kids. That helps, obviously, but you're not going to win this war just by outpopulating the socialists who want to control the school system. You have to strike at the root. And look, you think Hollywood has far-reaching impacts on society and our culture? No, the school system's more important. We're dealing with tons of young, impressionable minds, almost more than $800 billion of taxpayer money going towards the K-12 education system. every single year. That is a behemoth. It's a monopoly. It's hard to fight against, but we have had 12 states go universal on school choice in the past 3 years alone. What do I mean by universal school choice? Well, the money that would have followed you to the government school, you can still do that if you want. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school for real this time, and like with your doctor. And competition typically does lead to the public schools to do a better job, up their game in response to competition. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. Instead of focusing on indoctrination, they'll start to focus more on education, because when you go to the school board and you can take your money with you, when you complain, they'll have an incentive to say, well, maybe I'll listen to this person instead of trying to tell them to sit down and shut up and try to bully them. I'll actually treat them as a partner in the relationship. But if not, the family should be able to take that money that's meant for their child to go somewhere else if you want. If you want to go to a private religious or non-religious school, that should follow the student. We should also be able to use that for home-based education with curriculum or other expenses for home-based education as well. And these 12 states, it's all red states that have done so right now. It's the Republicans have led the charge as the parents' party. That some Democrats should start to defect on the issue. Some of them are in certain places. I've mentioned a couple of them in my book, The Parent Revolution, but we've just had more momentum than we've ever seen before. And I think it's because for a long time, the arguments for school choice had to do with low test scores. And that is compelling to some families who are in objectively failing schools based on academics. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, the school system is a form of outsourcing parenting in a way. Whether you want to think about it that way or not, your kids are going there for 13 years, 7 hours a day. And you should be able to pick that community that surrounds your child, because in so many places, parents found out they're sending their kids to an institution where they feel like they're being brainwashed for 13 years of their lives. And that is more likely to mobilize parents for change than anything else. And we're spending a lot of money on it. We're spending $20,000 per kid per year in the government-run school system today. It's an insane amount of money. Homeschooling costs way less. And even private school is on average about $12,000, $13,000 a kid for private school tuition, compared to $20,000 in the government schools. It's just an insane amount of money. We're not getting our money's worth. And in fact, it's worse than that. It's not just that they're not improving things. They're actively harming kids and moving our entire country in an anti-American direction.
So, and I want to touch on that here in a second. It's interesting. My now 17-year-old son, I had him on my podcast to talk about what it's been like for him the last few years since we pulled him. And he brought that up. He's like, parents and kids don't realize that they're being indoctrinated with the ideologies of their teachers and the other students and their peers. And he's like, but I'm here to tell you, I was influenced by my peers, and so here he is now 17, getting ready to finish, homeschooling and graduate, and he's already working for somebody. But even he started to recognize that once he was removed and was able to take the blinders off and see that. But let's talk about, like, where is the money going? Because all of this money is being poured into education. We have 19% of high school graduates graduating without being able to read, 50% of the American people not being able to read above a 5th grade level. Obviously, our education is not getting better.
Right. And they're focusing more on the LGBTs than the ABCs. We should not be surprised when outcomes aren't getting better, because look, some people get into the school system to push their political ideologies onto other people's children. And that's why when we fight for school choice, when we fight for curriculum reform in the public schools, when we fight for transparency, they fight against that harder than anything else, because they've gotten into this to push their political ideologies onto children. And that's a huge problem. But the money's also not making its way to the classroom either. Yeah, I talked earlier about how the funding has gone up overall by 170% since 1970. Teacher salaries have only gone up by about 10% since 1970 in real terms. So where's all the money going? So we do have data from 2000 till today from the National Center for Education Statistics, and it shows that nationwide, the number of students in the system has only increased by about 7%, but the number of administrators in the system has increased by about 90%. The government school system has become more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. They've got their priorities all out of whack because they're a monopoly that have zero incentive to spend additional dollars wisely. And there have been about 5 studies that find that when there's more competition with charter and private schools through school choice, the public schools actually start to pay their teachers a little more. And the reason for that is, well, when you're a monopoly, the district they just start spending the money on administrators and bloat and on frivolous items that have nothing to do with student learning. But once you're in a competitive environment, you start to say, hey, maybe when we want to attract the best talent, maybe we should spend the money on the important resource in the school, which happens to be the teacher. And so a lot of people frame school choice and parents getting more freedom in education as anti-teacher, but that's not the case at all, because the unions do a horrible job at representing the teachers. All they do is protect the lowest common denominator. They fight for uniform salary schedules, which benefits the worst teachers at the expense of the best teachers. The best teachers say to heck with this, and they leave the school system and go into other industries. And in fact, the Washington Post during the COVID era, look, a broken clock is right twice a day. They actually covered a story about a New Jersey public school teacher who had been in the system for decades. She started a micro school, which is basically 5 to 10 children. They were calling them pandemic pods at the time. 5 to 10 children getting together in a household. Families could economize on the process of homeschooling. You can hire one teacher or guide to guide those students. And this New Jersey teacher that left the school system was earning the same amount of money, a fraction of the class size, 10 instead of 40 kids. Mm-hmm. And they also had a lot more autonomy, and they had less bureaucratic red tape to deal with. And so they didn't take the next logical leap and say, hey, this is why the money should follow the child, so more families could have these opportunities, and so that teachers could benefit too, even more so, from starting their own schooling providers. And so I see this as a win-win solution. The families getting more choices is obviously a win, but also for the employees who currently operate in a monopoly and monopsony scenario, it benefits them as well to give their employers an incentive to do the right thing by them.
I love that. Well, and I think it's interesting because we are losing good teachers right and left. And even though I am a homeschool parent, I am a licensed teacher too. And I look at the really good teachers. It's true. They're leaving the system because they're not getting paid. And I saw that when I was teaching school, that there would be teachers that as soon as that bell rang, they were out the door. They were terrible teachers. And then I would watch my colleagues that were just amazing, and we're all making the same amount based on how long we've been there. And there was no incentive to do better except for those who had heart, who wanted to help the kids, and they're leaving.
The school system knows this too. The employers know that when teachers get a choice, they will take those other options if there are better opportunities. And so, like during COVID, I remember reporting on a district in Colorado. I believe it was Denver Public Schools. Their superintendent, while their government schools were closed, started sending out letters saying that, oh, all these micro schools are popping up. And, that causes segregation, trying to imply that, if you're a parent and you're trying to seek out a private sector alternative, either for homeschooling yourself or by doing these pandemic pods, that you are basically racist and you're trying to self-segregate. And instead of taking the next logical step and saying, well, this may be why we should open our schools instead of, so that all families could have some type of opportunity before them when it comes to educating their children. But they also, in that letter, pointed out that, well, teachers might start to think this is a good idea. And so they knew, you could kind of get a sense of, they're worried about the teachers figuring out that it's not just parents seeing that this was a good opportunity, but teachers saying, well, this is awesome. I can have so much more freedom here. I can be with a group of students that actually want to be educated, and I can actually discipline them if I need to. And so it's just a better scenario than the current status quo factory model government run school system, which any alternative is a huge threat, in so much that there were these micro schools in Arizona. And they've been taking ESA fund, education savings account funding that follows the child, for several years now. The ESAs in Arizona have existed since 2012, I want to say, for over a decade. And ESAs, it's a form of school choice. The money goes into a savings account directed by a parent. It's better than a voucher because the money isn't only used at private brick and mortar schools. You can also use it for homeschooling and any other education expenditure. And there was the NEA, the largest teachers union in the country. They actually put out an opposition research sheet on the founder of one of these micro school sectors in Arizona. His name was Kelly Smith, and it's Prenda Micro Schools, and they're very successful. They've been taking ESA funding for a while, and their enrollment just skyrocketed during the pandemic for obvious reasons. I mean, the unions out there in Arizona, they were sending fake obituaries to the governor. I mean, the theatrics and the fear mongering, which is so ridiculous during COVID. But the NEA thought that they were circulating this opposition research to their members. They had an incorrect email that went to a school choice advocate who leaked it to the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board's headline the next day was "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy." And there was a nice graphic of an elephant afraid of an ant, just going to show you that any little change with having more parental involvement and choice is such a terrifying threat to the monopoly that the unions have on money, but also the monopoly the unions have on the minds of other people's children. So I'm optimistic, though, that, look, homeschooling has skyrocketed, school choice expansion has skyrocketed, and that I think the momentum is going to continue as well.
I think so as well. Now, I want to talk about, because one of my concerns, and I know this is something you can address because we talked about it right before we went live. I guess we started recording, but is if all 50 states accept school choice and then the money follows the child, what regulations will the government try to put on homeschooling parents? That, because a lot of us homeschoolers don't want strings attached.
Yep.
I would rather be part of an enrichment program where I know that there's no strings attached, that I don't have to report ridiculous things that the public school has to report, which are BS statistics and numbers. Yep. and all the things that don't mean anything. What do you have to say to that? Like, is that a valid concern, that having strings attached to the money attached to the child?
The argument is, with government shekels comes government shackles. But the reality is, you can get the shackles without the shekels. And we do today. This has happened historically. In 1922, Oregon outlawed private education. You had to send your kid to Caesar. Was that because of a school choice program? No, it's because you had authoritarians who wanted to control the minds of other people's kids. And thankfully, 3 years later, in Pierce versus Society of Sisters at the Supreme Court, they overturned that bigoted law when the court famously ruled the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those are wise words that some people would be wise to remember these days. I'm looking at you, Joe Biden, who tweeted out that there's no such thing as other people's kids; it's society's kids. Hillary Clinton said the same thing with "It takes a village." It's this radical Marxist ideology that your children belong to the government. But today, you look at states like New York and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they are the worst states for homeschooling when it comes to regulation and overburdensome control by the government. But they have zero private school choice programs. So my response is, this is kind of a separate issue. And in fact, last year in Ohio, when they passed universal school choice, they're a Republican supermajority state, they passed universal school choice. Guess what they did at the same time? They deregulated homeschooling even more so in their state. So these can move in different directions. And I would argue, if you look at a correlation between homeschooling laws and school choice, the places that respect homeschool freedom also tend to be the places that are more likely to respect education freedom with the money following the child. You look at places like Oklahoma, Iowa, they're the best on homeschooling. They also have universal school choice. And so the separate point is, all of these programs are voluntary. No one is forced to take the money. If you were, I'd be against all of the programs if they were not voluntary. But every family can make that cost-benefit decision for their own families to accept the funding or not. But families should not tell other parents that they should not have that choice to accept the funding or not. And in fact, look, politics, as we all know, is about organized interests fighting for what they want. The unions do this all the time. The unions, they gather together and they lobby at the Capitol against any change to the status quo, including school choice. But with education freedom, with the money following the child, you create a broader coalition. You'll have more families entering homeschooling, more families joining the private education and leaving the government school system. And when that happens in the future, when the authoritarians in office try to come after your freedoms, you'll have a broader tent, a bigger coalition to fight back. And that's how we win. Look, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. The government's always going to come after our right to raise our children. But the way that we win is not by rejecting the incremental victory step in the right direction. It's by getting more people on our side. And then when we get more people on our side, we'll be more influential in the political arena. And whether we like it or not, that's how things work, right? If we have nobody homeschooling and then the government tries to come after us, they're going to be more likely to take our freedoms away than if we have tons of homeschoolers. And this is why I'm also optimistic post-COVID is we've seen a blossoming of homeschoolers. We've seen private school enrollment increase as well. Mm-hmm. And then my last thing is, look, Randy Weingarten, the head of the union, I also dedicated my book to her, by the way, for inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever. I also sent a version of the book to her. I sent a signed copy of the book to Stacey Davis Gates. She's the head of the Chicago Teachers Union. I called her a hypocrite. She sent the book back. Maybe it's above her reading level or something. But anyway, the Randy Weingarten has repeated this argument. She said, look, if you pass school choice, this is going to cause government to get involved in the private sector. And she was fear mongering because she's trying to get conservatives to vote against school choice. Is she saying that because she's a Republican or a libertarian anti-government type? No, she's a big government socialist and she wants to keep her gravy train going. Mm-hmm. And so if you're on Randy Weingarten's side and Joe Biden's side on this issue and not my side and President Trump's side, he endorsed the book as well. Ted Cruz did as well for my home state. He says on the back, you can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book. You're probably overthinking it, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of potential regulations. And so I would point to a state like Arizona. This is the best way to do it. They have basically no government regulation. They did when they first started. They had testing requirements. But because more families started to use it, they actually got rid of those testing requirements in 2022. You don't have to do any testing in Arizona. You don't have to do any type of curriculum mandates from the government. You don't have to change your admissions processes. It is about as free market as you can get. There is one kind of low bar, a reasonable kind of rule that they have in Arizona where it's a random audit each year. And it's just to make sure you're not spending the taxpayer dollars on drugs and crazy things like that. So it's education broadly defined. They don't say, oh, you have to teach this way, you have to take this test. And I think that's the way to do school choice. So instead of, some people will paint with a broad brush and say, we can't do school choice at all because I'm afraid of government overreach. I'll say, one, don't make perfect the enemy of the good. We should take the incremental victory as a step in the right direction, even if it's not perfect. And at the end of the day, we should look at and differentiate between different types of bills. We want to, instead of fighting against school choice overall, we should fight against regulation and say if there is an amendment introduced, and the Democrats will do this, when the Democrats know they don't have the votes to block school choice, what will they do? They'll introduce what I call poison pill amendments. They'll try to introduce those regulations. But usually, the Republicans will see what they're doing. They'll see that they're trying to sabotage the program, and they'll vote down those amendments most of the time.
That's awesome. Let's talk, because recently Connor Boyack sent out a newsletter regarding, and he quoted you regarding the Unscientific American, I think is what it was.
And he's a co-author of one of my recent books, Mediocrity. He's a great guy. But yeah, the Unscientific and Un-American.
Yeah, if you'll talk about that article that they posted about homeschooling families. I haven't addressed it on the podcast yet, and I was like, well, he's coming on, so I'm gonna have him bring it up.
Yeah, I was the first person to blast this on social media. It went viral. They were calling for federal homeschooling regulations, and it reminds me of this lady called named Elizabeth Bartholet. In 2020, she's a Harvard professor. She released an 80-page law review article calling to ban homeschooling just as everybody started doing it. I mean, academics can't read the room sometimes. She must have had her report finished, and then COVID happened, and then everybody was basically schooling at home in some way. And then she's releasing a report at the same time calling to ban homeschooling. And what was the logic that they put forth? I mean, look, a lot of these people in these, elite and so-called elite institutions, they think they're smarter than everybody else. They think that parents don't know how to raise their own kids. It's an elitist argument. It's a paternalistic argument, but parents know their kids' educational needs and care about their kids' educational needs far more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away who don't even know your child's name. If they don't know that, how are they going to figure out for each individual family what is best? There's no one size fits all solution. And that's what government does. They do one size fits all everything. And a lot of times it's one size fits none. It doesn't work for anybody really well. And it costs a lot of money. But there are arguments that she put forward, the arguments put forward by unscientific and un-American. They say that, oh, well, some parents might not educate their kids properly. Well, guess what? Some government schools don't educate kids at all, and they actively harm them, and we spend a bunch of money on it. I mean, in Baltimore, 40% of their high schools, guess what, have 0% proficiency rates. Are they calling to abolish the public school system in Baltimore? No, these same yahoos are calling to throw more money at the problem. Why don't they say, oh, well, maybe some homeschoolers might not do a good job. Maybe we should give them tons of money, $20,000 a kid. Maybe they don't bring that same energy to the government school system. And because it has nothing to do with logic, it has nothing to do with science, it has everything to do with control. And they even admitted in their article that, look, there's a lot of homeschoolers are winning the spelling bees. You got the famous mathematicians that were homeschoolers, and they're doing such a fantastic job. And in fact, if you look at the systematic review of the evidence by Brian Ray, published in the Journal of School Choice, I think it was like in 2017. Since then, the evidence has been similar, but all of the studies together, they overwhelmingly find that homeschoolers do a better job on academics. They do about the same with socialization. And I would say, look, you can capitalize on positive forms of socialization with homeschooling while getting rid of a lot of the negative forms of socialization. I mean, I went to government schools. In middle school, kids were playing this game called 10 seconds. It's where you fight for 10 seconds. That was the cool thing to do. People were getting rolled into gangs in the bathroom. People were doing drugs, engaging in promiscuous activities as well. That's not the type of socialization I want for my kids. I didn't fall through the cracks, thankfully, but a lot of other people do. Mm-hmm. And so, you can't rely on nobody falling through the cracks because a lot of people do. And so I think homeschooling is, you can capitalize on you can enroll in sports. You can have other community activities. You can do co-op activity. You can do hybrid homeschooling. And so, look, that's up to the parent. And when you're in control of what that environment looks like, you're going to do a lot better job than the government employees who are incentivized, quite frankly, to not really do a good job because the best ones leave, because the best ones figure out that they can get better opportunities elsewhere. And so the unscientific American, I mean, just off the top of my head, I didn't go through these on Twitter because I've done this with Elizabeth Bartholet before, but they'll say some parents might abuse their kids. They go all far off the deep end with the fear mongering. And it might be true that 0.1% of people, whatever the percentage is, might abuse their kids, but that you don't want to have like this. First of all, this happens in the government school system. We have a report by the Department of Education, and then more recently too, an article in Psychology Today, estimating that about over 10% of kids will experience educator sexual misconduct in the government-run schools by the time they graduate from high school. And so do you take that information and say, abolish the entire public school system? No, they say, oh, we should give them more money. Yeah. But if there is abuse, that we already have systems in place. If there's abuse, yes, the government should make sure, but they shouldn't say, oh, well, you might not eat proper nutrition, and so we got to have the government sitting at your dinner table each day. That is turning the Fourth Amendment on its head. It's guilty until proven innocent, and that is not the way we operate in this country, because we don't belong to the government. But if there is a problem, look, no one's defending abuse. I mean, in either sector. If that happens, parents should be held accountable, right? And if it's not a biological parent, if it's someone else, in any sector, people should be held accountable. But I would say that's less likely to happen with your own biological children. And we do have real data from the government school system that it is not perfect and there are problems there. And they also had problems with, some homeschoolers are doing it for religious reasons. Big freaking deal. We have religion in the government schools. They worship the state. And they worship the gender ideology and critical race theory, Marxism. Families should be able to direct the upbringing of their own kids. And that is what homeschooling does.
Amen. Well, I was going to say, and what I've noticed is, like, even in that article, it wasn't apples to apples comparison, right? They didn't talk about the abuse that happens in school. They didn't.
No, it's one-sided.
And it was my understanding that the sexual abuse or misconduct is even higher in the public school system than is reported.
Exactly, because a lot of it goes unreported, and
right.
I mean,
but we don't talk about that. And when we talk about socialization, we don't talk about the bullying, and we don't talk about bullying from both some teachers and from peers, and we don't talk about the drugs and the gangs and all of those things. Even my son, who went and graduated from government schooling, said, "Oh, Mom, the drugs run rampant." And I went to 2 different schools, and they were both considered great schools. And he goes,
"Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they were the great schools." And I saw it all over the place. I do have to chuckle, though, because I tell parents, I'm like, when it comes to socialization, just look at the parents, because it's usually the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And if they're a weird public schooler, they'd also be a weird homeschooler, because their parents are weird. So
right, but then also, like, the socialization at the government schools, in what first of all, it's an unnatural learning environment. Like, do we, like, today, if you want to go learn something, do you sit there with people that are all your same age, and then you sit there for years on end, and you have to be interested in the subject at this time? No, you go read something, you consult with someone, you go watch a video. There's a whole lot of different ways to learn things. And it just seems so unnatural to me. Like, even when I was in the government school system, I didn't really learn the stuff. I did a good job, and I had good grades all through because I had really good memory, I guess. But I also, and don't even get me into how you forget everything like a year later. Like, it's just regurgitating information that's poured down into your head. But even during school, I would learn these things after school. Like, when I was doing my homework, when I was reading about, when I was actually grappling with the information, I'd learn it before going into class. Like, I would, because it just seemed unnatural to me with the lecturer there at the front of the room. And before you enter kindergarten, I mean, if we had sent our kid, if society sent kids to government schools starting at birth, they would probably come back telling us that, you would never be able to learn how to walk unless you had the government, right? It's just, we've become so accustomed to this system, people become reliant on it, not knowing that it's actually inhibiting your child's development instead of helping it.
Now, let's talk about, a little bit, switching gears, the parent revolution, because this just came out. Let's talk about the book a little bit, which has been so fascinating. I actually get really mad. Like, I had to stop at times being like, I'm so angry. I'm so angry, even though I was watching it all happening, on the news and different things. But talk about the parent revolution. Yep. What made you decide to write it? And all that good stuff. Yeah.
So it was recently endorsed by Trump. It's now a national bestseller. Funny how that works. I'm honored to have his endorsement. But also, it starts out with some darkness. So I will admit that. It does turn to a very optimistic story about how, because of all these ridiculous things happened during the COVID era, with the injection of politics into the classroom, with the COVID insanity. I mean, there was just so many stupid things with COVID during the past, starting in 2020, where I was living in DC at the time in 2020, and COVID was a weird virus. It knew if you were in a restaurant, it would only float up here because you'd have to wear the mask when you walked in. But once you sat down, you could take the mask off. So I guess the COVID virus was always up here, only when you were eating. And in Sacramento County in California, some places had more ridiculous, restrictions than others, but they had this arbitrary closure rule in California that applied to schools, but not daycares. Because COVID was smart. It knew if you were learning something, then it would get you. But if not, if you were just sitting there in the same building, not doing a dang thing and twiddling your thumbs, well, then it was gonna let you go. But it just goes to show you the government had an incentive that listened to the teachers unions to close the private schools, their competition, while the taxpayers were still stuck footing the bill for the government-run school system. And in some places, they were charging families, like they were closing the schools in at least 10 states. They were closing public schools in some districts. Okay, fine. Charging families with the property taxes. But then you had them opening the same freaking buildings as daycare centers and having parents pay an additional few $100s a week for the privilege of sending their kids to the same schools that were too dangerous to open for schooling, but they were opening for daycare and charging families twice, basically. It made zero sense, but it just goes to show you that none of this had anything to do with science or the needs of kids. It had everything to do with politics and power. It was a ransom taking, a hostage taking scenario. And I mean, in places like Chicago, they were striking in 2022. I mean, 2 weeks to slow the spread turned into 2 years to flatten generation. And they even deleted a tweet from their official union account saying, quote, "The push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny." I mean, they threw every lefty buzzword at the wall to see what would stick. And they were even doing interpretive dance videos to protest reopening schools. It was so pathetic. I mean, you thought their test scores were bad. In Illinois, they have over 60 schools now with 0% math proficiency rates. Not a single kid proficient in math in over 60 schools in Illinois. Wow. But if you were a kid trying to sign up for dance, you're screwed too, because that dance video was horrible. I mean, it was pathetic, and the video quality was embarrassing as well. And these are the people trying to teach our kids things. They don't just fail on the math, reading, and writing. I'll just say that. But they also, I mean, they had a board member vacationing in Puerto Rico while thousands of miles away, while railing against going back to work, because apparently it was too unsafe to go back to work. But they could go to the grocery store, they could go to Puerto Rico, thousands of miles away. And again, it had nothing to do with safety. In Los Angeles, their union, they had a reopening plan, right? They called for more money. We knew they were going to do that. They do that all the time. But they even took it a step further. They said, "Hold my beer," to some of the other unions. And they called for Medicare for all, a wealth tax, police-free schools, and a ban on charter schools. What in the heck did any of that have to do with opening the schools safely? It had nothing to do with it. And it just goes to show you they overplayed their hand. They showed their true colors. Parents are pissed, and now they're voting with their feet. They're pushing for school choice. They're getting in a lot of states. And they're just, the trust is no longer there. The unions have broken their trust with the public. It was never there. They never gave a crap about parents. But now it was laid bare for everybody to see right before their eyes for several years in so many localities. And look, although the schools are open, the problems are still there. The curriculum misalignment is still there. They're still cutting off mics at school board meetings when parents disagree with them. All of the problems are still there. And that's why the parent revolution is continuing. And so it turns to a story of hope by saying, look, when parents have fought back, they've started to even win at the ballot box too. They've become an interest group beating the unions at their own game. And in 2022, there was a lot of, political discussion. If you turned on the news, you might have heard a prediction about the red wave in 2022 in the midterms. That didn't really happen. There wasn't a blue wave either, obviously, but there was a school choice wave. 76% of the candidates supported by my organization, the American Federation for Children, and our state affiliates won their races in 2022. And we didn't just play in the easy ones. We targeted 69 incumbents in state legislatures. That basically is the hardest thing to do in politics. Incumbents usually win re-election all the time, 95% of the time. We took out 40 of those 69. It was a political earthquake. And it continued in my home state even in this year of 2024. There were 21 so-called Republicans in the Texas House voted with all the Democrats against school choice, their own party platform, after it already passed the Senate easily, 18-13. Well, after the Super Tuesday primaries, 14 of those guys are gone. 14 are gone. A political earthquake rocked Texas, and for the first time in history, the Texas House has the votes for universal school choice, for the funding to follow the child, and it looks like it's going to happen next year in 2025. And when Texas government schools monopoly domino falls, a lot of the rest will come along as well. And so that's just Texas. I mean, Tennessee, another example. In 2022, 10 of the Republicans running for House were endorsed or funded by the teachers' unions. 9 of them lost. It has become a form of political suicide to associate with the teachers' unions on the Republican side. And even in the general election, think about 2021 in Virginia, a state that apparently went to Biden by 10 points in 2020. Well, there was a former governor there called Terry McAuliffe. He was running for governor in 2021. Again, basically an incumbent. At the last debate, guess what he said? He said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. That was a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for him. It didn't work out for him. Parents were upset, and Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, won on the issue of education of all things, which basically never happens. Democrats have had a decades-long double-digit advantage on the issue of education because the debates have usually been about who's going to throw more money at the problem, and that's who wins on education. Glenn Youngkin won on education by 6 points with those voters. That was the number 2 issue in the election. Voters made it a priority. And this wasn't just in Virginia. You look back at 2018, even before COVID, there was a headline in the Wall Street Journal after DeSantis barely won in 2018. A lot of people thought his opponent, Andrew Gillum, the Democrat, was going to win. DeSantis won by a fraction of a point. The headline in the Wall Street Journal the next day was that school choice moms tipped the governor's race in Florida. They were looking at CNN exit polling of all places that found that black moms in particular came out in force for DeSantis, much higher than expected. And what happened? What was the story? Well, his opponent, Andrew Gillum, he was actually a black Democrat, called to get rid of their existing school choice program, benefiting over 100,000 kids at the time, disproportionately non-white kids, disproportionately low-income kids. And those families who might have disagreed with DeSantis on a lot of other things, they said, you know what? This is too important. I don't want my kid to lose their scholarship to get into a better school. So they made that a single issue voting priority. And so this isn't just the right thing to do. It can also be a political winner as well. You fast forward to today, DeSantis won his reelection by 20 points. Florida is a deep red state. It was purplish before. Now they have supermajority Republican control in both chambers. And the reason I bring all this up, I don't like to get too political all the time. It shouldn't be a political issue. I mean, Democrats, Republicans, independents love school choice programs. They use them in large numbers. But I call something in the book called bipartisanship through hyperpartisanship. Look, you can make left and right-leaning arguments for school choice. It's an equalizer. It's a market-based reform. Mm-hmm. There's competition. It's kind of like Pell Grants with college. The scholarships, you can take the scholarships to public or private universities. With pre-K programs that the Democrats typically support, you can take the money to private providers that you can choose from, even religious ones. Same thing with even food stamps. I'm not saying we should have more or less of any of these programs, but if we're going to spend the money, it should go to people, not buildings. We should fund students, not systems. With food stamps, do you have to take that money to an assigned government grocery provider? No, you can take it to wherever you want to go. The money follows the decision of the individual, or when it comes to Pell Grants, the decision of the students. And so the more that the Republicans lean into parental rights as a political winner, the more that the Democrats will face political consequences for opposing it. And when that happens, politicians, they respond more to power and politics than logic or morality. That's just a reality. And so I've thought for a long time, if I could just tell the Democrats that this is the right thing to do, that they would vote for it. If I gave them the facts, if I showed them that Democrat constituents support it and benefit from it, they would vote for it. The problem is They're a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers unions. 99.9% of Randy Weingarten's contributions from the AFT went to Democrats in 2022. It's a money laundering operation. It ought to be illegal. It's been like that for decades, and it's not going to reverse anytime soon until the Democrats start to get an incentive to say, maybe I should listen to my constituents, the parents, as opposed to the government school unions who represent the adults in the system. Maybe they should listen to the kids union instead, the parents. The only way that's ever going to happen is if they start to lose where it matters at the ballot box, if they start to bleed votes on the issue. Fast forward to today, Glenn Youngkin's success was not a blip on the map. We've had 2 polls in battleground congressional districts and battleground states finding Republicans either even or up on the issue of education, polls commissioned by the Democrats for Education Reform, of all things, a left-leaning group, finding that Democrats have lost their decades-long double-digit advantage on education because it's gone from being about who spends more money to who is going to respect my right as a parent. And so we've seen a seismic shift from the Democrats towards the Republicans on the issue of education freedom. Glenn Youngkin showed the Republicans how to be the parents' party, a blueprint for political success. And the latest poll with Trump versus Biden, for example, found no difference. It was an even match on the issue of education between Biden and Trump. I'd say Trump has a way better track record on education, better policies than Biden. Biden's a hypocrite on school choice. He went to private school, sent his kids to private school, and then pulls the ladder up from behind himself, fighting against school choice for others. But that you have on a poll nationwide finding a tie between a Democrat and a Republican, that is a big deal. It should have alarm bells sounding off for Biden, which, they probably already have those alarm bells going off with a lot of other issues like the debate and Trump just annihilating Biden in a lot of the polls. But that the Democrats are losing ground substantially and education's a big deal too. Maybe they'll listen to they'll read the polls. Maybe they'll listen to their constituents. Maybe they'll see the political winds shifting away from them on these issues, and maybe they'll say, okay, well, we'll fight for more money for public schools, fine, but maybe we'll stop trying to stomp on parental rights in education. Maybe we'll respect parents and try, instead of treating them as an enemy, and instead of just pretending we're partners with parents, actually do something to back up those claims, because parents aren't buying what they're selling right now.
No. And just to remind the government, these are my kids.
Sure.
These are my kids. What last thoughts would you like? Would you want to share with our wonderful parents out here?
I would just say, look, the parent revolution, even if you're homeschooling your own kids, even if you're sending your kid to a school that you think is a great fit for them, it's a fight for you. Even if you don't have kids, even if your grandkids are being homeschooled, maybe your kids are already out of the school system already. This is a fight for you too, because this is about our entire country. And the radical left, if they're using the school system to move our country in a more socialist direction, you can't win that war just by outpopulating them. You have to strike at the root. And so this book also, it's not just a school choice book. It also calls for reforms to the public school system. Like, let's see where the money's going. We're spending the money as taxpayers. Where is it going? Is it going towards the classroom? Is it going towards administrative bloat? Is it going towards Randy Weingarten, who makes over $500,000 a year, who doesn't do anything to improve education? Is it going towards political activities? We see the NEA's money goes towards political activities, not even to representing the teachers. It's a massive scam in the government school system. So let's see that. Let's see, what's the curriculum? Just show us what the curriculum is in the public schools. Because even if your kids aren't going there, those kids are going to turn out to vote later on in life. They might vote to take your homeschooling freedoms away in the future if we don't do something about it now. They might vote to raise your taxes later, because they're learning in a government school system for so many years, millions of kids, that big government is the solution to all of their problems. So we have to fight back. There's other simple proposals too that you would think would be a no-brainer. One is the public school shouldn't be keeping secrets from parents. I can't even believe we have to say this, but in California, the Democrats are voting to keep secrets from parents if if this child changes their gender at school, guess what the California Democrats want? They want to make it so that parents can't be informed of their own child changing their gender at school. They don't. That is insane. That they're wedging themselves as the government between parent and child. They've overstepped their bounds, and that is something that even if you lose on the issue and maybe the Democrats vote against it, you can use that to hold them politically accountable in the future. So even if you don't think you're going to win in the short run, these are things that are important to push for so that you can win in the long run. And that's all in the book. You can get it anywhere. It's on Amazon. It's 25% off today. And I don't know when they're going to increase the price again, but it's right now 25% off. The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Janae, as well, for having me. And I'm fired up. You guys should be fired up too. There's a lot to be upset about when it comes to the government school system and society overall. But this is one area where we're finally making headway. We're winning. Milton Friedman's vision is finally coming to fruition right before our very eyes. And the best part about it is it's Randy Weingarten and the teachers union's own dang fault for overplaying their hand.
I love it. Corey, thank you so much for coming on. I will put in the show notes the Parent Revolution link so that y'all can get that, read it. I'm not kidding. It will fire you up and frankly, be so grateful that you are homeschooling right now. But with that, Parent Revolution, Corey DeAngelis, he also co-authored Mediocrity. And I'll also put a link for that in there. Corey, thank you so much. As always, mamas, papas, grandmas, and grandpas, you're doing better than you think you are, and you got this. We'll talk next week. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.